Mastering SOC 2 for SaaS companies. Our contracts with vendors must handcuff them to our security standards. Where do we incorporate specific security and compliance requirements within our contractual agreements with third-party vendors and service providers to guarantee adherence to our organization's stringent security standards and compliance obligations? In order to guarantee adherence to the organization's stringent security standards and compliance obligations, specific security and compliance requirements should be incorporated within contractual agreements with third-party vendors and service providers through a structured and systematic approach. This can be achieved by implementing the following measures. Contract review and assessment. Prior to onboarding any new third-party vendor or service provider, the organization should conduct a thorough review and assessment of the vendor's contract to identify and understand the security and compliance requirements that need to be met. This review should be performed by the organization's legal and compliance teams in collaboration with the information security team to ensure that all necessary security controls and compliance obligations are addressed. Security and compliance requirements identification. The organization should identify and specify the necessary security and compliance requirements that need to be met by the third-party vendor or service provider. These requirements should be based on the organization's security standards, compliance obligations, and the type of service or product being provided. For example, the requirements may include compliance with industry-recognized security standards such as SOC 2, ISO 27001, or HIPAA. Implementation of specific security controls such as encryption, access controls, and monitoring. Adherence to incident response and disaster recovery procedures. Regular security audits and compliance assessments. Training and awareness programs for vendor employees. Data ownership and handling requirements. Breach notification and response procedures. Contractual language and provision. The identified security and compliance requirements should be explicitly stated in the contractual agreement with a third-party vendor or service provider. The contractual language should be clear, concise, and unambiguous to avoid any misunderstanding or misinterpretation. The contractual provisions should include a detailed description of the security controls and compliance obligations that need to be met, the specific standards or regulations that the vendor must comply with, the consequences of non-compliance, including termination of the agreement and notification of affected parties, the vendor's liability for any security breaches or compliance failures, the requirements for incident response and notification, the procedures for auditing and assessing the vendor's compliance, vendor risk assessment and due diligence. The organization should conduct a thorough risk assessment and due diligence on the third-party vendor or service provider to ensure they have the necessary capabilities and resources to meet the identified security and compliance requirements. This assessment should include review of the vendor's security policies and procedures, evaluation of the vendor's security controls and compliance posture, assessment of the vendor's incident response and disaster recovery capabilities, verification of the vendor's compliance with relevant standards and regulations, analysis of the vendor's reputation and industry standing, ongoing monitoring and evaluation. The organization should establish a process for ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the third-party vendor or service provider's compliance with the contractual security and compliance requirements. This process should include regular security audits and compliance assessments, quarterly business reviews to discuss security and compliance matters, incident response and breach notification procedures, continuous monitoring of the vendor's security controls and compliance posture, annual review and update of the contractual agreement to ensure it remains relevant and effective. By incorporating specific security and compliance requirements within contractual agreements with third-party vendors and service providers, the organization can guarantee adherence to its stringent security standards and compliance obligations, thereby reducing the risk of security breaches and compliance failures. This approach ensures that the organization's sensitive data and systems are protected, and its customers' trust is maintained.